But then if you look at the absolute data, you actually look at the amounts that changed over that, we're going to say 4 to 8 year period because it's potentially 8 for many people. If in 8 years I told you that you were going to gain 3.5 pounds of body fat in all the 8 years, and if we take out the natural progression with just age, then the gain is only between like 1.5 and 1.75 pounds. If I told you that over 8 years you would gain 1.75 pounds, does that seem like the sky is falling?
No, it does not.
And for muscle loss, it's even less. It's less than half a pound. And so you're telling people your body fat gain is going to double and you're going to lose twice as much muscle. You look at the actual outcomes in the study, and the study says BMI wise, which is not the greatest metric, but it's perfectly fine in a sedentary population, which is essentially what this looked at. BMI did not change irrespective of age. So as long as we saw the normal tracking of age, we don't see any difference between women that are going through perimenopause versus women that are not.
Welcome to Cut the Crap with Beth and Matt, the world's #1 no bullshit health and fitness podcast.
Are you ready to cut the crap with your diet and exercise, get strong as fuck, and build a healthy relationship with food? Then you've come to the right place.
Let's go. If you'd like to support us in the podcast, join our Patreon where you get exclusive content, which consists of monthly workouts you can do at home or at the gym, monthly challenges that are either strength, habit, or mindset based, and access to over 100 plus low-calorie, high-protein, family-friendly meals. These are all designed by a professional chef who is certified in nutrition. These recipes are already in MyFitnessPal for easy fucking tracking. New recipes are also added each week.
We believe that fitness is for everyone, so this is our way of getting you started on your health and fitness journey at a price most everyone can afford. So what the fuck are you waiting for? We'll see you in the Patreon. We're live. Let's do it.
Sweet. How are you guys doing?
Let's do it.
You know, pretty good. Yeah,
Good,
look
I
at
have to
that.
say.
Well,
Admittedly.
Jinx.
I know. I'm getting ready to go to Florida, so I'm pumped. Get me the fuck out of here.
Yeah, you guys have been getting a lot of snow, haven't you?
Yes. Too much.
Not so bad here in Hawaii.
Yeah.
I can't imagine. Unless you're up
Bummer.
at the weather observation station,
Yeah.
all the way up to, what is that, 12,000 feet or 14,000 feet up there or something like that?
So Haleakala is the one on Maui, on my island, and I'm not really sure about that exact height, but it is pretty
Gotcha.
damn high. And we do get snow there occasionally. I mean, you get more snow on Mauna Kea, on the Big Island, but you do get snow here occasionally. So
Yeah, I actually did visit that weather station when I was in Maui a couple of years ago.
it's pretty cool.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's pretty dope. And it was definitely cold up there.
Yeah, it really is. Especially when you get used to the beach type weather, you go from 80 degrees to 40 degrees immediately. It's pretty rough.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Can
So I guess
imagine.
it's probably a good time to let everybody know that we're chatting with Dr. Alan Bacon again today.
Yeah. Dr. Alan Bacon is back.
Hey, everybody. How's it going?
How's it going?
Thank you for having me on again, guys. I really do appreciate the invite. Lots of great stuff that we can talk about in the fitness and nutrition space.
For sure.
Oh, yeah. So, yes, I have a list. I wanted to actually chat about, because it's fresh in my mind and it's fresh from your Instagram page, is the menofluencers, right? The menofluencers.
Menofluencers.
And then the mansplaining comments coming from people getting upset from men talking facts. I understand, it's a touchy subject because, you're a woman, vulnerable. It's a tough time in your life. But I really would love women to understand when it comes to the facts and the science about menopause and what to look out for with, meno grifters, I should say, right?
Unfortunately, this is going to become a really, really big thing because it's almost like this is the thing that's taking the country by storm right now in the fitness and health space. It's the menopause. It's a susceptible population because things are changing quite dramatically. And the experience of the menopause transition is 100% valid. And so the biggest issue that I think we have and why we're seeing this is essentially a back and forth. In the past, even doctors and many men in particular have been complicit in saying, oh, it's not really that big of a deal. Just, deal with it and you'll be fine. And you hear that from so many doctors over the years, you get a little bit of bitter about it. And I don't blame people for feeling that way. I really don't think that this is an unrealistic reaction that people are having. So unfortunately, what's happening now is that a lot of people have realized that there's this sentiment deep down of we've never been listened to, people don't take us seriously.
Makes sense.
And so what's happening is they're massaging or manipulating the research or the experience that's out there to essentially sell a narrative that ultimately ends up with you having to, listen to their podcast, which is ironic that we're talking about this here, buy their supplements, buy their programs, buy their
Well,
diets. And the reality is that these things don't appear to be necessary. I mean, when we actually look at the data, and so unfortunately, what's happening is essentially these people they found a sensitive point, and now they're drumming up fear. They're drumming up a lot of fear. Oh, you're
Menopause
gonna
is
get
being treated as like a symptom, essentially, like it's a disease, almost in a way. That's what a
they're
lot
ma-
of these people are doing, right?
Yes, they're making it seem like a disease, but on top of making it seem like a disease, they're spreading a lot of misinformation about it. They're like, it's never
Mhm.
been studied. There are no studies in women. There's no, and you sit there and you look at that and you're like, well, yeah, if you try to argue against that, it almost seems chauvinistic because we didn't really start bringing women into studies until 93 or 94 pretty,
hmm
pretty regularly, which was a massive disservice. And so
Mhm.
any studies that we can get in a population is good. More studies that we can get in menopausal women, perimenopausal women, the better. That doesn't discount the studies that we have, and we have a lot of studies in menopausal women, but people discount the studies that we have because it might not say menopause in the title.
Oh.
But any study that looks at women age 40 to 60 are
hmm
going to include the perimenopause transition, unless we're assuming that the perimenopause transition doesn't start until like after 60. And so we've got a lot of different studies that we can look at and we can say, hey, look, we have a lot of women in these age groups and we can get an idea of what's going on here. And that's not to say that we don't need more studies. And that's not to say that our ideas won't change over time.
Right.
But that doesn't discount the studies that we have just because they don't say menopause in the study. If you look at a study like Ponzer 2021 is one of the ones that I mentioned recently, where I point out this out as an example. And you're probably familiar with the study if you're not necessarily familiar with the name and the date, but it's that study that they looked at in 2021 that suggested that between the ages of 20 and 60, the
Mhm.
Yes.
resting metabolic rate roughly does not change.
Yeah, we know it.
hmm
Doesn't matter between gender, doesn't matter, it's literally age dependent. And then after 60, we start to see it drop. But if we look at the genders, it's actually dropping in tandem.
You're right.
Right.
I
It's
can
not
parallel almost.
right. It's not gender related.
Mhm.
But people ignore this and they'll say, hey, look, we've got this one study in this very small sample of women in postmenopause, and it shows like a slight, it says significant reduction in, energy expenditure. And it's typically the non-resting energy expenditure. But they'll say, hey, look, we've got this drop in energy expenditure. Therefore, the perimenopause transition causes this. And you're like, but wait, if we look at 10,000 people or more, we don't see it. So is it more likely that, and across the same demographic, is it more likely that this study somehow caught it when a bigger, better study didn't? Or is it more likely that the smaller study had some errors with the fact that it's not as powered as the bigger study? And so people will ignore these studies like Ponder because they'll be like, oh, well, that doesn't fit my narrative and that doesn't allow me to sell diets and training. So I'm going to go with the one that I really like of like 40 people instead of
Oh,
10,000.
confirmation bias.
Right.
Mm.
Yeah.
Right. And so this becomes really problematic. And on top of that type of thing, we're really hearing a massaging of the information. And I don't know if this is intentional disinformation or it's just a misunderstanding of what they're reading. And the Swan study is a really big one that I've seen multiple people in the menopause space misrepresenting. And it's an excellent study, but you have to know how to read it to really get information out of it.
Yeah, we talked about this study with our friends, the menopause diet ladies. We talked about this study when they were on. It's fantastic. Let's definitely talk about it.
It's a wonderful study. We'll see if we actually align with what we're saying here, and I would be interested to hear what their take was. But if you look at the raw data says something different in a practical sense than what you hear if you hear the terms changed. What this study looked at for the listeners is this looked at the perimenopause transition, and they found that for most people, it's between 4 and 8 years when you're going through
hmm
menopause. And they followed a lot of women. I think it was 8,000 some. Don't quote me on
Wow.
the exact number, but it's
Yeah.
close to 10K. They followed all these women over this period, and they actually, you know, it's great because it was a longitudinal study that looked out over this entire period. So it wasn't just like a little snapshot where we don't really know what was going on. We saw this entire thing. And so if you look at it, yes, statistically, it is significant that the women through the perimenopause transition gained more body fat and lost more lean muscle. And if you wanted to sell something, you could say they doubled the amount of body fat that they gained and they doubled the amount of lean muscle that they lost. And you go, oh my God, that is absolutely appalling and amazing. Like, this is something that I should really be scared about.
Mm-hmm.
But then if you look at the absolute data, you actually look at the amounts that changed over that, we're going to say 4 to 8 year period because it's potentially 8 for many people. If in 8 years I told you that you were going to gain 3.5 pounds of body fat in all the 8 years, and if we take out the natural progression with just age, then the gain is only between like 1.5 and 1.75 pounds. If I told you that over 8 years you would gain 1.75 pounds, does that seem like the sky is falling?
No.
It does not.
And for muscle loss, it's even less. It's less than half a pound. And so you're telling people your body fat gain is going to double and you're going to lose twice as much muscle. You look at the actual outcomes in the study, and the study says BMI wise, which is not the greatest metric, but it's perfectly fine in a sedentary population, which is essentially what this looked at. BMI did not change, irrespective of age. So as long as we saw the normal tracking of age, we don't see any difference between women that are going through perimenopause versus women that are not.
Mhm.
So if we know that the BMI isn't changing, and they say specifically in the study there is no accelerated change for BMI due to the menopause transition. They straight up say that.
And that's a bold claim
Right.
to
I
be
mean,
able to say that in a study.
but that's what the data
Mhm.
shows. And
Right.
then the other side of the equation is that people are saying, oh, well, it's going to double your fat gain and it's going to
Right.
double your lean muscle loss.
Yeah.
And they're not mentioning that this is akin to me saying, I'm going to give you twice as much money as I was going to before, but the amount that I was going to give you before was 1 cent. And now
It's
you're only getting
nefarious,
2 cents.
but
So
yeah,
so like
Mhm.
it sounds like I'm being this really altruistic guy, but I'm giving you nothing.
for sure.
Right.
And so that's unfortunately what's happening in this menopause space.
Mm.
So when we look at this, we say, okay, well, this is not doom and gloom. And
Right.
that does not invalidate the experience that you're going through, because the reason that we do see some of these accelerated rates is because of the experience that you're going through.
Yeah.
That has very real effects. Because of changes in hormones, there's a propensity for bone loss. There's a propensity for changes in where you store body fat. So
Mhm.
adiposity
Yep.
becomes centrally located, whereas it has never been like that before. So all of a sudden, if you're a normal person who doesn't really watch their diet too well, they don't really exercise or lift weights, and you start losing bone at like you've never lost before, if you start gaining body fat around your stomach, I mean, you're going to gain body fat statistically as you age, but now it's all going to your stomach. And you're saying, I'm gaining a lot more fat than I was before. Well, at the rate might not be any more than it was before, but it's showing up someplace different. It's not going to your butt and your
Yeah,
thighs,
how it's stored or
Right.
where it's
Right.
stored is
or
different.
like maybe hopefully your boobs if that's where you want to store it. There's some places where like you could be storing it naturally prior to menopause that you just never noticed because it wasn't a
Mhm.
concern. Like
Mhm.
sometimes having a little bit more fat on your butt is a good thing for a lot of women. Like they like the look.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But now all of a sudden it's becoming very concerning because nobody wants that to build up, either viscerally or in the stomach area. But because of these shifts in hormones, we have these changes that don't change the fact that calories still control this. So eating in the calorie surplus is still what's causing this, but it causes changes in your experience.
Yeah.
You're now storing it centrally, so you notice it a lot more. You're now storing it centrally, and when you have that visceral fat storage, all of a sudden this becomes a more of a cardiovascular health risk.
Right.
Mhm.
You're starting to lose bone at a rate that you'd never lost before. You never cared about lifting in the past, but now all of a sudden it's catching up.
Our friend
Yeah.
sarcopenia is knocking at the door.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and sarcopenia is going to start to kick in. And so all of this, if we look at these changes in these really big, highly powered studies, they don't seem to be massively accelerated because of the menopause transition itself. But it's likely because this isn't a sedentary population that doesn't lift or eat very well on the whole. When you look at thousands and thousands of women or thousands and thousands of people in general, I mean, men don't do it either. And if
Right.
we had these
Mhm.
changes that made us have, hot flashes and not sleep and messed with our hunger signaling and,
Yeah.
did all of these other things, men would be an absolute wreck during these periods too. We're bigger babies than women are. Have you seen the man flu?
I
And so
agree.
put us
Yeah.
you put us into this shit equation,
Yeah.
you would be like, men are gaining triple the body fat and losing all this muscle. Like it would be
Right.
absolutely unreal. But we're ignoring the reality of the situation to push a message because it's probably monetarily expedient.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And unfortunately,
Yeah.
this is a situation that when you tell people that their experience or what they were worried about is valid, they're much more readily accepting of that message. When
Hmm.
you say, hold up, you're not doomed. This is actually not as big of a problem as you think it is, and you probably should not term it that way, particularly if you're a man saying it. You should say, hey, look, the experience that you have is completely valid. The hunger levels that you have are completely valid. You're sleeping like shit, which is, if you ever look at any kind of, sleep
Yeah.
data, anybody that has terrible sleep, you cannot stick to a diet very well.
Oh, it's
You
horrible. Yeah.
snack without thinking about it. Your willpower to fight cravings goes down. That's what's happening to all of these women.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And no wonder they're struggling.
Oh, yeah.
But
I
that doesn't
mean,
mean that we
yeah.
lie to people.
Right. Right. It's like you're not purposely going around saying this is your fault and you can control this and da 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 da. It's
Yeah,
like,
the way we like to say is like the good news is you have total control for the most
right. It's like we're
part of these.
trying to empower you. But
Yeah.
as a woman in her 52, I can understand. But also, I think more women need to be proactive rather than reactive. And
Yes. Yes.
suddenly turning 50 or maybe before that, and like, oh my God, I gained 20 pounds overnight. Everything's fucking happening at once. And it's like, well, no, this has been happening over a period of time, but now you're seeing it and you're feeling all this stuff and you want to overhaul your entire life in, 30 days.
Yeah, and so the conversation that usually comes from this, and what you've probably seen me reiterate over and over and over, and people don't like this messaging, but this is the messaging that people really need to take home. What you do prior to menopause is the
Hmm.
same thing that you do through and post menopause.
Yep.
That people will say, well, then all of a sudden, it becomes much more important for me to lift weights. No, it's always been important for you to lift weights. You were just
Hmm.
ignoring it and you weren't getting hit with the massive problem.
Right.
All of a sudden you are.
Yeah.
So it's not that you change anything up. You don't lift differently. You don't do different cardio. I know that's being thrown around. I know that they're throwing around,
Oh,
all
the
of a
hit,
sudden,
the
yeah,
do
there's no
this.
there's no
Yeah.
difference. And
Right.
and there's no study that suggests that there's any difference. This is just cortisol fear mongering. And
Mm.
and we've been over that before. It's
Sure have.
Yeah,
it's
that's all connected. I feel like isn't
It
Stacey
is.
Sims the one that talks about the hit and the cortisol and all that?
I'm
Women need
not
to be doing a specific, I'm hearing a lot of this hit stuff, like the sprinting.
Being bad for women
No,
or being
well, no, being good, but then
okay.
also you have the ones that are saying that don't do that during
Yeah, I was gonna say
menopause.
what like yeah, you have
you
wild
see both.
wild mouths on each side.
Well, so
Yeah.
that's the funny thing is you see some saying don't do hit and then others saying don't do miss, the medium
And they're
intensity
saying
steady
it for
state
the same
cardio.
fucking reason. It's like
Yes.
you guys can't both be
Yeah.
right.
They're saying it for the same
Yeah.
reason, which is the funniest thing. But this is why it's so hilarious when they do this, because like if we look at cortisol as an example of this
Mhm.
situation. So the issue with cortisol is it's a lot like insulin. It serves a lot of beneficial purposes and it also serves a lot of really shitty purposes. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, people only know the shitty purposes.
Right.
Right.
And so if you have raised cortisol from like stress or not sleeping, which all of this can come with menopause, certainly the menopause experience, if you have that in the presence of a calorie surplus, it's going to cause you to potentially store more fat.
Yep.
Having that in play can potentially store more fat.
Mhm.
But when we're talking about these things like exercise-induced raises in cortisol are not the same thing as
Mhm.
stress or like the mental stress, the emotional stress reduced or induced chronic cortisol increases.
Right. Acute.
And
Yeah.
so
Acute
these
chronic, yeah.
acute changes are actually a feature, not a bug, and it's actually a net beneficial thing. And it's funny for two reasons. One, the post-exercise raising cortisol is actually more closely related to that hormone than any other hormone. So having higher cortisol post-exercise, you're more likely to build lean muscle than having higher testosterone, growth hormone, any of those. All these things that everybody is like, oh, we need to optimize these. And then we're just
Mhm.
like, fuck cortisol. I don't care what that does, but it's the one that's most closely related to building lean muscle. The other thing that's really funny about it is if we're really concerned about chronic cortisol raise, technically MIST would be the right choice. The medium intensity steady state that a lot of these meno influencers are trying to scare you away from.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and I'm not saying that this is the prescription. What I'm saying is do whatever you want to do. Whatever is most
Yeah.
sustainable and you enjoy, do that because it doesn't matter. But if we're concerned about cortisol, their logic makes absolutely no sense
Right.
because the medium intensity steady state cardio is the one that, yes, at like a 2 hour time span has a higher blip on the cortisol radar, but it dips more than any other exercise for the rest of the day. So if you care about minimizing your cortisol, MIST would actually be the answer because it causes the lower cortisol level for the majority of the day compared to HIIT.
Mm-hmm.
But again, this is spurious logic. This is like, oh, you really need to micromanage these things. Instead of saying you should have been doing the same thing that you like, things that you're doing now is what you should have been doing before. You should have been having an overly nutritious diet,
Right.
whole minimally processed foods as the base. You should have been lifting weights. You should have been doing cardio. And so if you're doing those things, there's no special like magical thing that you need to do afterwards because people will always come to me and they'll say, okay, well, how are you going to program for a woman differently than you would program for a man? And I'm like, I'm not going to. And they're like, well, then you're not up to date on the research. I'm like, I'm not because there's no difference between the two. Women and men grow muscle the same way. The nutrition works in the same manner. Women may need to be more diligent in their tracking and in their practices perimenopause, but that's because you've got more challenges
Yeah.
that you're facing. And so I don't want to minimize the challenges that are being
Right.
faced. I think that that's really a bad thing. But this is the difficulty in navigating this, particularly as a man, is that if you say, okay, hold up, some of this is wrong, some of this is right. When you say some of this is wrong, that's the part that people kind of latch onto and then they shut down and they don't want to listen to the rest of the thing.
Yeah.
But my stance is if we're just instilling fear and misrepresenting studies, if I just came out and said, hey, the SWAN study doubles the amount of fat gain that you have and doubles the amount of lean muscle that you lose, I'm taking away your agency. I'm also
Mhm.
taking away your responsibility. And I feel
Yeah.
like patronizing women is not the way to have a better society moving forward. What we need to do is we need to be very honest about it. We need to be empathetic
Yeah.
about the situation, and pretending to be empathetic while instilling fear is not being empathetic. It is stealing agency.
Yeah.
And that's the problem that we have with these menopause influencers right now is that they're intentionally stealing agency. And a lot of women will accept that right now because it removes culpability in a way. You say, okay, well, I gained weight, but it's not my fault. No, it's partly your fault because habits that we do are controllable for us. I mean, you can control
Mm-hmm.
everything that you put in your mouth. You can control, whether or not you go to the gym for the most part. You can control whether you're a little bit active throughout the day. So you do have culpability.
Mm-hmm.
But the great thing about that means you're also the one that can take credit when you succeed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this goes back to a lot of what you're saying. Your tag phrase, we can do hard shit. I mean, we can do hard things.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of those hard things that women will
Yeah.
face. And if we take away their agency, if we lie to them about the amount of control that they have, all we're doing is a disservice.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Oh, 100%.
And they may
100%.
not realize it at the time too, but I do think a lot of women are starting to wise up to that. Even though as big as this meno influencer thing is right now, I do think a lot of women are seeing through it because we go way back to the 90s and early 2000s of these same women being targeted with different bullshit back then too. So it's like now they're just being targeted for their menopausalness when
Mm.
later in their life they were not skinny enough or they were whatever it was back then in the 90s and 2000s.
Menopausalness. That was Ryan Reed saying, wasn't
Oh
it?
God, gross.
Remember
Yeah.
him?
Yeah.
You
I
and
was
your
wondering where I came up with that.
menopausalness.
I was wondering where I had heard that. And that makes sense because he is one of those people. So yeah.
Well, so it's interesting to me. I think it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. I think that we've got 5 to 10 years of this getting worse and worse and worse with menopause myths,
Yeah.
because again, this is the hot thing. This is what's making money right now. It was keto a couple of years back. It was intermittent fasting.
Right.
We're switching to fitness and health is switching to the menopause thing.
Yeah, I haven't been hearing much about those things.
Yeah, because menopause took over. Nobody cares about
Yeah,
that anymore.
holy
They
crap.
realize that this is like this is all these Jenny Craig,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
the Atkins diet, like this stuff cycles in. It's menopause right now, and people don't realize that. Oh, this is not a good movement for like to really bring you up with your health. This is a movement because just like every other movement, there's a
Mhm.
lot of money in it.
I see
Oh, yeah.
the big movement right now is just the taking the like you said, the personal agency away from people, the lack of
Yeah.
personal responsibility and things like that. When we're talking about, going a little bit outside of just menopause, but talking about the seed oils and the red dyes and food dyes and stuff too, that's taking away people's personal responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, I think that people, this is not female specific.
Mhm.
Everybody likes this, and everybody likes it because if you can remove that responsibility, at least initially, you feel better. It removes stress.
Yeah.
And people are very prone to saying, hey, anything that can remove stress right now is worth any amount of stress down the road. Because as long as I get rid of the stress now, I'll be perfectly fine. So, that's something to deal with later. And so by saying, "Hey, it's just menopause," we're removing that and it feels good. And so that's why people really like when influencers say this. And people don't like when influencers say, "Hey, it's partly menopause and it's a lot your habits." And, the good news is that if we get the right information out there, you can realize that the effort that you put into these habits will actually pay off. And what
Oh,
scares
yeah.
me right now is that the message is you're broken and you're doomed, so we're going to be consistently playing catch up. And so you might like hearing, oh, you're broken to begin with, but over time, that can be very demotivating. And so we see some really interesting things, even in like the HRT data that I've got some theories about that I can't possibly prove, but I've got some theories
Mhm.
about. So we look at drops in like estrogen and things like that in the menopausal transition, and they say, okay, well, if we just get on HRT, then we can prevent these losses of lean muscle mass. Now, what's interesting is there's one very small study that suggests that this might be true, but it's like 10 people. But if we look at the bigger studies, what gets really interesting about the systemic reviews with HRT for women during the menopausal transition is that it seems to work, either not at all, or when it does work, it seems to work for about 3 years.
Mhm.
And then by year 6, all of the benefits are gone, which suggests to me that it's not the HRT doing all of the lifting for this work. It's the fact that women get on HRT, it starts to alleviate those symptoms. Maybe they've been told it will help them build muscle. So then they finally start getting into the gym and
Mhm.
lifting weights for the first time. And it starts staving off that sarcopenia. And then 3 years in, they're like, you know what? I'm on the HRT. I don't really need to be doing this. I don't really love this. They never made it a lifestyle change. And that's
Mhm.
why we see that reversion 6 years down the road.
Got it.
And so this is a theory of mine. This is not proven, but
Mhm.
if it was the HRT itself, we would think that those benefits would continue on and it wouldn't return to the baseline of someone that never got onto HRT by year 6. So it suggests to me that there's probably motivation in play. And
Yeah.
the problem with this type of motivation, the problem with the type of motivation that these menopause influencers sell you is that it's a fleeting type of motivation. It's not core understanding of what's actually happening. It's not building that, confidence in yourself. It's not taking on that responsibility and then earning that feeling of accomplishment. And this all goes back to that stealing of agency. And I think that people are not wise to the fact that that's happening quite yet. And unfortunately, I think that we need to be a little bit more critical of the information coming out there.
Mhm.
And, hopefully be able to get some more studies because certainly when people say we need more studies in the menopausal population, they're 100% right.
Mhm.
It's not an appropriate response when you disagree with the current studies that are out there.
Right. Isn't Dr. Bill Campbell working on some studies right now with menopause and perimenopause?
He is. So it'll be interesting to see what research comes out from that
Mhm.
lab at the same time.
Yeah. I've definitely been listening to some of his stuff, and it almost confuses me a little bit because I feel like it's still really not clear, and I don't know if that's because he's still in the middle of it, but what I get out of it, it's still the same thing as we're talking about, like, you know, boring basic. Nothing really changes, but the muscle is
Yeah.
where he's finding is the issue is like we're under muscled in a nutshell.
I mean, we can say society is under-muscled in general. I mean,
Yeah.
muscle mass index is one of the greatest indicators of longevity and health, and not just longevity, but the quality of that longevity. It's health for life, just not just to live.
Mm.
Sarcopenia is a really big thing, and in our 40s, we start to lose muscle mass at about a rate of 0.5% every year, and this is irrespective of gender. We start to lose muscle mass at about 0.5% every year. It goes up to 1 to 2% in our 50s, and then it maxes out at about a 3% rate every year in our 60s onward.
Mm-hmm.
And so these people, what's funny is this kind of coincides with that menopause transition, which is why we really start to notice a lot of those sarcopenic rates. And if you've got this menopause transition that's making you feel like crap, you're moving even less, like no wonder it's even higher. And so these people are
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
experiencing something that's very valid and very
Mhm.
real. But women have had a disservice done to them for many, many decades because, when we were younger, the message was always, you need to be skinny to be
Right.
attractive.
Right.
And, if you played sports, you look too much like a man. And it's really funny to look at the pictures of girls that people would say look like a man back then because they don't even look like they have any muscle compared to today's standards.
Right.
But
Right.
but what's really funny about it all is I love the shift that's happening. I think that girls that are in their 20s are going to be in a much better place. I think that
Oh
people
yeah.
our age and older are kind of screwed because we've essentially been subconsciously
They lived it.
bullied. Well, we've
Yeah.
been
Yeah.
subconsciously bullied. And I'm not saying that you're saying
Right.
that you can't get out of this hole that's been dug, but you've been dug into a hole. And again, this is one of the reasons that the menopausal crowd is so desperate to find answers because a lot of this has been a hole that's been dug by society and doctors and men and everything. And so the feeling of being betrayed is very real. And I think that it's very valid. And if you start to look at some of the ways that this happened, so if you look at like when we were younger, looking at the whole you need to be skinny type of thing. So the answer was always, well, you need to do a lot of cardio and you need to not eat. And so we've started to change our ideals, and even some of our generation and older have started to look at having lean muscle and an athletic build as a very great thing. And I think that that's wonderful. The problem is subconsciously we're still in that hole. So we think that the way to get there is to just like not eat and to not weight train. And so women don't even start to look into weight training or have not historically until the menopause transition where everything's like, oh shit, things are falling apart.
Yeah.
So for the girls that are 20 years old and coming up, they're going to start to get into this lifting weights, spending time in the gym. They're going to start cruising through menopause compared to past generations.
Hmm.
Because we're talking about the fact that what we do prior is not necessarily much different than what we do after.
Right.
If they start to formulate those habits, if they haven't had that stigma that society put on them that
Right.
unfortunately people have had in the past,
Oh yeah.
they're not going to have to deal with the same challenges. So all of a sudden, we're going to look at menopausal transitions in those periods, and we're going to be like, man, it's weird. That fat gain and that muscle loss has really kind of tempered down. And I guarantee you that that's what's going to happen when we see these younger girls in 30 and 40 years
Hmm.
passing through this transition. All of a sudden, the data is going to look completely different.
That'd be really
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I think about myself in my early 40s when I was still drinking and all that fun shit, and I felt like absolute shit. I'm pretty sure my perimenopausal symptoms were like horrible, right? And then, I got into strength training, got into health, and I'm 52 now. And, I've suffered with some hot flashes here and there that are no longer. But I can almost guarantee if I did not start taking care of myself in my early 40s, that I would not feel like I don't want to say I'm breezing through because I know everyone has a different menopause experience. Everyone has a different menopause experience. But for me
Everyone's
right
like, fuck.
Well,
now,
look, for anybody that's listened to our podcast, you've lived your experience this
you
entire time
know,
on the
it's
podcast.
like it's really I'm not gaining weight because I'm doing the things, the boring basic shit,
Right.
like continuously.
Taking you
So
almost 10 years now, right?
yeah, I mean, I'm 52. I haven't had a period, so I could be postmenopausal. I don't know because I'm on birth control that you just take continuously.
In having those drinking episodes and all that, that's going to mess with your sleep too.
Oh
So
yeah,
you're a susceptible population to all of these problems, and then these people are kind of adding on top of it.
yeah,
And so you're certainly susceptible to losing more lean muscle, losing more bone, gaining more body fat, particularly centrally. And so that experience very much feels like the sky is falling. And I think this is a tough thing to balance. And having more voices like you out there are very, very beneficial because you can say, hey, I went through this.
yeah,
And guess when things started to look up? When I started doing what people said was really healthy even before menopause. These are the types
right.
of things that really make a difference.
Hmm.
And so, starting to tell people, well, you have to train this way. You have to lift this many reps. No, that's not true.
Right,
You have to do this cardio. No, that's not true. Just do something and you're okay.
right.
And I mean, just as an example with the lift X many reps, I've seen depending on which influencer you see, they say different things, which is kind of a funny thing.
Always.
So it's like you can only lift 4 to 6 reps, or you can only lift under 8 reps or anything like that. And you'll say, "Okay, can you please show me a study where you're getting this idea from?" And the study that they will show you will say something like, "Oh, well, if you take perimenopausal women and you have them lift weights, well, they retain a lot more muscle and they lose a lot less bone than this person that just ran." And you're like, "Okay, that's great."
How are you comparing the two?
Like what but so then where did you get like 4 to 6 reps? And
Right.
so it's really funny because if you look at the breadth of evidence, there are some studies that suggest slightly lower might be more beneficial in certain things, but the breadth of evidence doesn't say that. So when people say you have to lift heavy, lifting heavy is a relative measure. What is heavy?
Right.
Is heavy 10 reps? Is heavy 12 reps? Because if we look at the basis of research, everything up to about 15 or maybe even 18 reps seems to work as well as 4 reps
Right.
or maintaining. This is through the menopause transition in menopausal
Mhm.
populations, seems to maintain lean muscle or build lean muscle and maintain bone just fine. Because like loading in a 10 to 12 rep range, you think loading when you're taking things to in proximity to failure at a 10 rep range is not going to build muscle? Literally every IFBB pro bodybuilder has used that for 40 years as like the basis. So somebody needs to convince me what mechanistically changes about a woman that all of a sudden hypertrophy training is different. Yes, you've got less estrogen, but within the normal shift that happens during menopause has never been proven to be a massive like anabolic,
Right.
so why would the hypertrophy programs change? The answer is still, hey, you need to get in, you need to lift. And lifting heavy is different for different people. And if, you're a person that's never lifted before, trying to get in and lift 5 reps, maybe a little bit of an ask, maybe a little bit dangerous from an injury perspective. And I don't want to say that it absolutely is, because if you're working within your ability, it may not be. But if you're working at 10 reps, maybe you've got a little bit more room to say, okay, well, I'm going to call it at 8 or whatever it is based on how you're
Not
feeling
fully
rather than
push
getting
myself.
pinned at 5 reps,
Mhm. Yeah,
under
because
a
if you're
weight
going for
that's,
5 reps, you're gonna be naturally picking a little bit of a heavier weight than for 10 reps.
yeah, and it's going to gas a lot quicker. You're going to gas a lot quicker. So it's going to catch up to you a lot more quickly. And so my answer to any of these things is, well, what do you enjoy doing? What are you going to be more likely to do for a long period of time? Or conversely, what do you hate doing the least?
Mhm.
Mhm.
Do
I
that.
Yeah.
think the whole reps for weightlifting, especially for menopausal women, goes back to the 90s and 2000s when we were wanting to get toned, right? You didn't want to get
It's the
bulky.
pink dumbbells.
You wanted to be a printer and get toned, so you lifted lightweight for heavy reps, or lightweight, a lot of reps. That was the trend for decades. You get that in the circuit classes, the high intensity group classes, and everything like that. It's
Do
always
20, 30
burnout reps
fucking
and
30 bicep girls
yes, yes.
Well,
The
what's
toning, I
really
don't wanna get bulky, I wanna burn fat, so I'm lifting weights really quickly and doing a lot of it, yeah,
getting the burn. Mhm.
yeah.
what's really funny about that too? I mean, when we started getting more and more information out there, and like I think Zordos and Schoenfeld and some of those guys started doing some really interesting studies where they actually show that between 4 and 30 reps will cause the same hypertrophy if the volume load is equated. And I think that the issue with those interval classes that were in like the 90s and stuff is that people weren't working anywhere near failure. They were just kind of like, you get the like half pound dumbbell and you just do that. And it basically is just cardio because you're not actually challenging that muscle in proximity to failure. Because when we look at this research that suggests where you need to go to actually build this lean toned muscle that people are always talking about, it needs to be within maybe 1 or 2 reps short of failure as long as you're outside of your beginner stages. So really pushing yourself is a very, very important thing here. And I think that that's the
Mhm,
most difficult thing for people when they're starting to get into this new lifestyle, is they actually learning to push through the discomfort.
Yeah.
Because even when we look at research with that, people will typically stop about 5 reps short of failure. If you tell them, hey, I want you to take this until you can't lift anymore, they stop at about 80 or 85%.
Yep.
But you need to be at 95% to make it
Mhm.
work. And
mhm,
so, anything typically works in your first year or so. So you'll see that progress and you'll be like, okay, I'm doing really well. And then all of a
And then it'll
sudden,
plateau.
yep.
Mhm.
And that's where we really need to start emphasizing these types of things. But again, these protocols aren't any different between men and women. It's the same
Yeah.
thing. But it's if you're starting to lift because you just hit menopause and now, you're 45 or 50 or whatever you are when you start doing these things, it can be almost like a shock
Yeah.
in not really knowing what you need to do. And so a little bit of discomfort, you're like, okay, I'm done. No, keep pushing through. As long as you understand how to lift the weights and you're competent with your form, it's really time to
Hmm.
start pushing that intensity. And
Yeah.
it's going to benefit you incredibly when you do that. Now, there's two things that I can think of when we talk about this concept of there's no reason to program differently for men and women. There's two times that I can think of that you would actually program differently. And this is it. You would program differently based off of preferences.
Hmm.
So a person doesn't like doing hack squat. Okay, well, we can do something else. You're going to now get Bulgarian split squats. Good luck. You can do
I was going to say,
you can you can
split
do
squats.
Congratulations.
What can I
yeah.
have now
You
instead?
you get one swap. That's your swap. So preferences can come into play because there's certainly different ways that you could program splits. There's certainly different ways that you can program. There's a lot of exercises that'll work for different things. The only time that you have to do a specific exercise, like if you think that you have to do barbell back squat, you only have to do that if you're competing in something that requires you to do barbell back squat. Otherwise, you don't have to. You can do another type of squat.
Or if you just really
Yeah.
fucking love it, right?
Yeah, I mean that's great. That's part of the preferences thing.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, if this is your preference, that's how you program. The other way that you program is because of goals and how people react to things. So if you have a female that wants to grow her butt and legs, I want more toned butt, I want better legs. Okay, well, we might relatively prioritize the lower half of the body a little bit more than we might chest. We might deprioritize chest. We're not going to avoid chest. We're going to deprioritize it. If you have a man that says, I really want chicken legs and big shoulders, you go, okay, cool. We're going to deprioritize legs and we're going to put more chest and shoulders into play. These are things that are not based on gender. These are things that are based on what you want to do. Yeah. And so if a woman comes in and she says, I just don't really want to spend a ton of time working on biceps. Okay, well, let's do, 4 sets for the week and then call it a day and then spend the rest
Right.
of the time doing like hamstring stuff or whatever it is. And that's, it's a sexist thing to say women like to train legs and men have chicken legs, but that's how, traditionally those splits tend to happen. So
I
for
hate
anyone,
legs.
I mean,
I will sit in my car for
That's
20
like, no,
minutes
fuck
before
that.
leg day.
And
I keep
I'm
telling myself
it's
it's my
so funny
favorite.
because I actually love training legs. I don't enjoy training upper body as much. So Beth and I, we just say fuck the norms around here.
Yeah,
But
but there you go. That's
yeah,
why there's a reason for you to train in a specific way. Now, for a lot of people, you would say, okay, well, I just want to have the most balanced physique possible. Well, that's a goal. So you would then balance that training. So you would have, the arm work in there. You would have the chest work in there. You would have the leg work in there. I would just caution people not to avoid those things entirely because
right.
if you never train chest, what happens when you fall forward and have to brace yourself with your hands, and
Yeah.
now all of a sudden, because you've never
We're still
built up
training
any
for life here.
right,
So
you've never built up any ligament or tendon strength. Now all of a sudden you've torn a pec tendon or
mhm.
Right.
That's
or
I
like
love that you use as an example to illustrate the how important it is to strength train, not just for building a chiseled chest or something, or glamorous booty. So
well, if I asked you, this is going to be a quiz for you guys. If I asked you when you're working with your clients, and if you were to ask a question to them, what is the number one thing that you could do to reduce injury risk? What do you think that their answer would be? Don't tell me if you know the answer. Tell me what you think the Gen Pop answer would be.
okay, so
The
what
number
can you
one thing to reduce injury risk?
What can they do to reduce injury risk? What's the number one thing that they
lose
should do?
weight is what most people would say.
Not deadlift.
That's they're watching too much strongman. I would say losing weight is actually one of the proper answers. I would say that most would probably say you need to stretch. Uh,
That's a
Oh,
big one.
okay.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, would you say that that's probably fair that many would say
That's
that?
yeah.
So the funny thing is when you look at the data for this, when you look at the injury reduction risk of things like static stretching, which people spend a lot of time doing these days. I mean, people really get into yoga, and if you're doing these things for stress relief, it's perfectly fine. I mean, it's a great thing. If you're doing it because you think it's going to make you more injury resistant, it's about a 0 to 4% increase, reduction of injury risk. It's like nothing. Stretching doesn't really reduce injury risk very much. But if you look at things like strength training, it's upwards of a 69% reduction in injury risk. So again, these are these things that maybe not have may not have been valued so much for many, many, many years, and maybe making a really big benefit in your life if you start getting into it, even if it is starting in the perimenopausal period. I mean, there's no better time than now to start these types of things. But just like that example of like falling down and catching
Right.
yourself instead of, face planting. I mean, if you
Yeah.
try to catch yourself and you've never worked chest before, I mean, holy crap, that, those connections in there, your shoulders can take a lot of abuse, and you're never going to be able to predict when that stuff happens.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And
I just
so,
had a fall like last week. I mean, Ohio just got under ice for days in a row,
mhm,
and I slipped going out to my car, and I had the strength and the mobility to be able to auto correct while I was falling to
yeah.
land right and avoid something worse. And of course, with strengthening my body for years now, I was well equipped to handle a blow like that.
Oh
Well, the
yeah.
other,
I mean, when I
but
have done like trail running races and fallen down Mount Katahdin on rocks, I mean, I should have broken bones, but I
Yeah,
truly
that time that
believe
we were descending Katahdin, you did it
that
hard. I'm surprised you
strength
didn't break
training saved
anything.
me for
Yes.
sure.
yeah, I mean, not only is it going to help you become more resistant with the soft tissues, but it's obviously going to strengthen your bones and everything too.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And the cool thing for those people that really like to stretch and get worried about this recommendation of, hey, you're probably spending too much time stretching. Training itself, taken to end ranges of motion, has been shown to increase flexibility to the same rate as static stretching. So if we're going to be prioritizing our time for doing something that decreases injury risk, increases flexibility, increases strength, increases our bone, density, all of these things come through resistance training.
Strength
And
training
so
wins.
spending less time, doing toe
Doing
touches,
Pilates.
yeah, is probably a good thing because
Is
it's probably.
Pilates strength training, Dr. Alan Bacon?
Don't ask me this question.
This
I
is
don't.
something people ask me all the time though. And I'm
So
like,
you're going to certainly have benefits to strength and probably even muscle building in the beginning when you're doing Pilates because it's body weight movement.
mhm.
At some
Especially
point,
you're
you're.
a newbie.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If you've never really
Yeah.
done anything before, I mean, it can be a great way to like lean into physical fitness.
Yeah.
Mhm.
The problem is you're going to plateau at some point because if you have no ability to continue progressive overload, the consistently adding a greater and greater stressor onto your body has no reason to adapt. And so,
Pilates is great, and you should be doing it in conjunction with strength training.
yeah, I mean, it's the same
In
thing
an
with.
ideal world.
It's like yoga. I mean, so
Yeah.
when people are like, "Should I do yoga?" I'm like, "I don't care." I mean, do you like it? Do you enjoy it? Does it lower that stress? Hey, if we want to talk about lowering cortisol and yoga actually de-stresses you, yeah, go do yoga. There's a
Right.
lot of benefits to it in that aspect. If you
Yeah.
hate doing yoga, like for me, it would raise my stress. I'd be like, I gotta get out of it. Like I'm wasting my time doing this. It probably wouldn't be a net benefit for me, but that just
That's how I
shows
feel. Yeah.
it just shows that I'm ignorant. So, this is one of those things that you have to take it on a case by case basis, and that's why we.
I love personally. I enjoy static stretching, doing yoga. Not I don't do a lot of traditional yoga, but I do a lot of like those type of movements.
Mhm.
But because they help me feel good in the moment, and that's really what it comes down to. I enjoy doing them. It helps me mentally mostly just slow down and decompress. I'm not doing it to warm my body up or to build muscle or anything like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
I
don't
mean,
stretch at all.
it feels great. I don't stretch at all anymore either.
I don't fucking stretch worth a shit.
There's
I
there's
still
no
touch
there's no
still
real
touch my
benefit to
toes. Fuck it.
there's no real benefit to doing it though if you're weight training to end ranges of motion. I mean, you don't
Yeah.
Yeah.
you don't really need to spend a whole
Right.
lot of time doing that type of thing. I mean, that's
Agreed.
literally what the research shows. So,
Yeah.
for people that are first starting out and they're just getting into fitness, yeah, certainly stretch. Add in a little bit of a routine, 10 minutes. Don't do more than that. Do 10 minutes, and,
Hmm.
and hit some of those things, a couple times a week, 3, 4 times
That's
a week.
perfect because my stretching routine that I give for some of my clients is no more than 10 minutes. So good to
Oh,
know.
that's completely fine. And actually, I,
Yeah.
I actually have the exact numbers somewhere. It was something like if you spend 5 minutes 5 times per week, you get the maximal benefits from stretching, and it just you spread it out and that type of thing. But
I love that.
it's funny how much time we spend because I mean, for the past decade, my wife was a competitive CrossFitter, and I would go into CrossFit gyms, and people would be stretching for 45 minutes, and I'm like, what is going on here? Like
Right.
we're we're losing half of our workout because we're stretching. It
Yeah,
was
we're
absolutely.
time cramped already, so let's focus on the things that are going to give us the
Yeah.
most bang for our buck.
Stretching drives me crazy. I'm like, just get into it. I'll walk for 10 minutes and then I'm lifting.
Yeah, do something to elevate your heart rate, right, and warm your
Yeah.
body up in preparation for that movement, which most of the time, right, you could just go start squatting to do that. So it looks like Alan has something to say here. So
No, I'm laughing because I don't even walk. But there's literally nothing.
again,
There's nothing
goes
wrong
back to
with it.
that preference, right?
There's
So
nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with it. But like you can also just like do 2 or 3 warm-up sets working
yeah,
out.
Mhm.
And as long as again, this is very research heavy
there's
because
no perfect warm up routine.
I'm such a nerd, but like when you look at the research on this, it says as long as like that last set is at about 80% of what your working weight is going to be, you're
Mhm.
warm.
Hmm.
And so,
You're warmed up.
then you can go. And so there's a lot of people that, yeah, if you have a pre-existing injury, yeah, it's probably going to take you longer than what we're saying here. This is assuming that you don't have a pre-existing injury. If you want to stretch a little bit more or do something like that to like really feel warmed up, do those dynamic stretches, walk, do a little bit of a jog, that kind of thing to get your
That's
heart
why I
rate up.
tell people dynamic stretching rather than just doing a static hold, just static
Mhm.
stretching like we did in gym class.
Well, the other reason that I can probably get away with not walking or anything like that is because it's 80 degrees here.
Well, yeah.
And so,
So
and
your
so
joints aren't frozen.
What do you have, an outdoor gym?
no, it's just I'm never like tight. I'm never cold. And so
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I'm like,
if
what are
you
you talking about?
if you're
Okay.
going in from being outside and you're like, man, I'm kind of like stiff. I need to
Oh,
like,
yeah,
maybe walking
makes
makes even
sense.
more sense then.
Yeah.
And again, this personal preference things that don't really matter one way or another. It's like, what do you like to do? What gets you into the zone? And this could even be a pregame routine for you. And for
Mhm.
people that are finding difficulty in making fitness a lifestyle, pregame routines are a really, really good thing. Um, what you essentially do is you find a set of actions that will bring you into doing something that you want to do. And in this case, we're talking about fitness, getting into the gym. You start off with something that is readily available and that you can do every single time. Maybe that is mixing up a pre-workout in a blender bottle. It takes no effort to do that. Maybe it is setting your clothes out the night before if you're going to work out the next day. Whatever it is, you pick something that's very easy and ready to do.
Yeah.
The reason that you do that is because if you prepare in a way that starts this domino cascade, what it does is it starts getting you moving. Then the next step in whatever it is, you gradually increase movement until you've gotten to the task or whatever it is you're trying to achieve. So
Yeah.
maybe it's mixing a pre-workout, then it's tossing on your clothes, then it's getting into the gym. Maybe that pre-workout walk is part of what mentally gets you ready to lift well, and that really works. And if you stick with
It
these same
does.
types of habits, it makes a big difference in whether or not you go through with getting these things done.
Yeah. There's an actual name for it, and I forget. I learned in my HMCC course, but it's like when people are struggling, let's say to get their steps or go on the treadmill, you're like, okay, maybe you can do, what is one thing that you like to do during this time that you could do at the same time? Like maybe watch your favorite show and get your steps in. It's not habit stacking, but it's something else.
That's different than a pregame routine, but that's a very, very good strategy
Yeah.
too. And
Hmm.
it's called something bundling.
Didn't
Habit
we just talk
bundling.
about that a couple weeks ago,
Habit
Beth?
bundling.
I
Because
think
you were
it's
talking
habit
about Coach
bundling.
Amy,
It might be habit bundling.
We
something we
talked
were
about this on the podcast where
yeah.
when you try to get clients to do something they don't want to do, pair it with something that you
Fold,
want to do
yeah,
at the same time.
walk, stand while folding laundry, or fold laundry while watching
Um,
something like that. Yeah,
Keep talking.
keep
I'm,
talking.
I'm going to find it really quickly here.
Looking it
'Cause-
up. It's
yeah.
that's got to be what it is. Because I thought originally when we described it, it was habit stacking, but it's not necessarily habit stacking.
it is something
It's
bundling, but I don't know if it's habit bundling.
it's similar
It's
because you're
it's temptation pairing or temptation bundling.
there
Okay,
it is,
temptation bundling.
temptation.
Yeah, and so I mean, this is a beautiful strategy that you brought up. It works really, really well.
Hmm.
It's that the whole idea is like you've got something that you know that you need to do, but then there are things that you
Hmm.
want to do and you want to be able
Right.
to pair them together, so as an example, if you know that you need to get your step count up, maybe what you do is you hop on the treadmill and you bring an iPad or a phone and you watch Netflix while you do it because you
Hmm.
were going to probably sit on the couch and watch Netflix anyways. And so this way you
Exactly.
can do something that you want to do while doing something that you need to do, and it makes your life a whole lot
Hmm.
easier.
Yep.
That's an awesome strategy,
Absolutely,
though.
it
I do.
is.
I love that kind of stuff. Yeah, because it gets people to do things, even including myself. It's like, all right, I need to get some walks in. What can I do? Well, let's
Yeah, if you're doing this
listen to a
long monotonous
podcast or
thing, like
something.
yeah, it's low intensity. Absolutely, walk it out
I
or run it out, whatever you need to do.
I haven't found that cardio is easier than it's ever been before.
What's up, y'all? You may have heard Beth and myself talk about the new Flow gummies from Cured Nutrition and how much we're really enjoying them, which is why I wanted to let you know about Microdose Madness from Cured Nutrition.
Microdose Madness is a sale that is running now through March 10th, and it's good for an insane 30% off of all of their gummies, including Flow and the classic Serenity gummy, which we absolutely love. Not only that, but you can actually double dunk. Get it? Ha ha ha. March Madness? Dunk, dunk. Ha ha. Oh man, I cracked myself up. But listen, you can actually double dunk and save an extra $5 off with our code CTC. And I've really been enjoying experimenting with Flow. In fact, I took one right before recording this to help me stay focused, even though I'm cheesy as hell. I've really been enjoying Flow before my workouts and endurance runs just to help me stay energized and focused so I can absolutely crush my training. When it's time to unwind and fully enjoy life, Flow is there to help you stay energized and fully present. So whether you're chasing your kids around, you're getting ready to head out for a nice hike, or going out with your friends, Flow gives you the stamina to keep up without crashing. So go ahead, check out their Gummy Madness that they're running right now for 30% off of all gummies, plus an extra $5 with our code. Visit curednutrition.com/CTC and use the code CTC at checkout. That's CURED nutrition.com/CTC, and our coupon code is CTC.
And I say that because, like, you've got Spotify, you can listen to a podcast, you can
Oh
listen to
yeah.
music, you can listen to an Audible. Like,
Yeah.
book on tape is the most amazing thing in the world for
Oh,
me.
I love it.
I read 30 books
Yeah.
last year.
You mean you listened?
Yeah.
Yeah,
There was no
I
reading
know.
involved. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, the problem for me is that, like, I read so much research every day that my eyes can't handle
Yeah.
any more reading. And so I use Audible as a way to just listen to crap book and, stuff that I just want to listen to for fun. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
this is what I do when, like, I'm walking and stuff. And it,
Mhm.
and it
For me,
really
it's
makes
podcasts. That's what gets me going.
this one specifically.
Hell no. I hate
I
listening to
don't I don't
ourselves.
think I've ever listened to an episode of our podcast in
Well,
almost 3 years.
you're doing yourself a disservice. It's a great
Every time I'm
podcast.
like, shut the fuck up, Matt. Shut up,
I
Matt.
know. Well, I do the same thing. I'm like, shut the fuck up, Beth. Man, what are you talking about?
I'm tired of
You
your
sound
crap.
crazy.
Yeah, but you're bringing so much value to the space.
Oh,
Well, we just don't want to listen. Like even doing with videos and stuff. I don't like to watch my own videos while I'm editing them. I don't know. It's just
I do.
it's weird to me.
That's one thing I do. I laugh at myself because I'm
Yeah.
like, if I can't laugh at this video, then no one else is. So
Well, yeah, I mean that's fair. I crack myself up all the time, but I just don't like watching myself. I don't know.
yeah,
You know that statistic that talks about how, like, you think that you're like 25% more attractive than you are? Like, every time I look at these things and I'm staring at myself on, like, YouTube, I'm like, man, that's rough.
So then you're even less than that? Is that what
Yeah.
you're saying?
I'm like, what is going on there?
Oh man.
oh my god,
Which is the number one reason that I probably shouldn't rewatch stuff on YouTube.
There we go.
yeah.
So, for you, Beth, how are you feeling with the information that's going out around about, like, menopause, and what's your take on some of the stuff that's being put out there? And I ask specifically because you've gone through this. I mean, you know what the
Yeah,
experience is like. So you probably have a much more salient point than anybody else.
I think there's way too much information. And if I didn't know what I'm talking about or wasn't educated, I would be confused as fuck.
Mhm.
And that is coming from someone that is educated in, I've actually taken the menopause course and it's the same information. That's the thing. Like I took the Girls Gone Strong menopause course, and people are like, "What did you learn from it?" And I was like, "Actually, I didn't
It'll
really
work.
learn. I really didn't learn that much. I hate to say it,
Just
but
reiterating what you
I
already.
I just really learned more of tools as a coach handling someone with menopause, like resources wise,
Yeah.
and that everyone has a different experience, and kind of like how to get better sleep. But it really, like, the basic science is this. It's the same.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I
And I
just
think
think it's
that's the discouraging thing for people is that when they realize that the fitness and nutrition, there's no hack,
right, right. Yeah.
it almost feels like you're at a loss then
Mhm.
Yeah.
because of how much
Um,
harder it feels.
and then I also feel like we're way too much confusing information on HRT and testosterone, and people are like, what should I take? And everyone's just like, it's out of control. Actually, I think that part may be even worse than the
Mhm.
actual menopause information is all like what you can do for your symptoms.
Mhm.
That's
Well, and
wild.
I think that HRT has very real utility in a lot of people, but the problem is assuming that you need HRT off the bat is
not everyone can take it either. So,
right, is probably an error. And so, if you have like significant joint pains, if you've got some issues with like hot flashes that are beyond normal, if you've got, the sleep issues, sometimes it can be very, very beneficial. And if
oh, for
all of a
sure.
sudden that joint pain goes away and you can start walking again and you start to get into the gym again, wow, it makes a big difference. And so
Oh,
when
yeah.
when we talk about these types of things, I don't want people to think that this is saying that we're anti-HRT or that we don't,
No, definitely not. I'm
you
all
know,
for it, actually.
yeah.
I just think there's way too many people on there saying that it causes cancer or you need to do this and instead of doing that, that you should be taking these pellets. I think that's the confusing information, and people just need to actually go to their fucking doctor.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And go to your
Personalized
doc
Stop
and go to
getting
your doc.
treatment.
medical information online from social media.
Stop getting your medical information, yeah, from meno influencers.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, the problem is that a lot of these meno influencers are doctors. And so please go to your doctor and speak with them about your specific
Yes, your
symptoms.
personal experience.
Man knows
Yes. And
your history, knows a lot more about you than somebody that's never even met you online.
yeah,
Right.
and what concerns me is, in having treated patients that do this type of thing, what really concerns you as a provider is they'll see commercials or they'll be told something by like the internet that they need to do. And then they'll go in and they become very aggressive. They're
Yeah.
like, "You need to give this to me." And you look at their case and you're like, "You're not this is not indicated. Like,
Mhm.
this is the potential side effects outweigh the benefits." And they're like, "Give it to me." Please don't do that because
Right. Right.
this is something that I can identify with providers because this does happen a lot. And if you go in there as there's a difference between being an advocate for your health and saying, "Hey, what do you think about this? This is what I've heard." And then listening to them. And if you don't believe them, then get a second opinion.
Right.
But trying to force somebody after they've given your opinion is not a productive way to move forward because you're going to be dealing with that doctor who's now unhappy that they're potentially prescribing something. And doctors will sometimes prescribe things if they, in their gut they think this is probably isn't the right move, but this person really wants it because the reality of the situation these days is that the patient has a lot of power with things like Google and Yelp reviews. And so they hold their
Yeah.
doctors hostage. And this is one of the reasons that we had some of the opioid epidemic for quite
Mm.
a while, because patients would come in and they say, if you don't do this, I'm going to, slander your name anywhere that I can. And that happens quite often. And I think that people aren't really aware of how often that happens.
Yeah.
I don't know how big of a problem this actually is, but I feel like it's starting to become one, is like online pharmacies. Like that's where, I mean, you can get somebody to sell you any kind of a prescription online if you just lie on your intake form or go to one of these gray market pharmacies, I'd call them.
Like
I
for a
mean,
GLP-1.
it's essentially
For
hims and hers.
for anything, like for not just GLP-1s specifically, because you can get those like any compounded or pharmacy right now, but just anything in general. Like you can get so much.
The problem with compounding pharmacies, including hims and hers, is that those drugs are not there's not strict quality control
Yeah.
on those things. And so you don't know necessarily what you're getting. Two, they will often give you drugs that are illegal, which is very weird. So
It's
just an
compound.
example.
Yeah, they're not regulated by the FDA, right? Compounded these.
Well, no, not entirely. But what's really weird is in practicality, I've seen them actually give drugs that aren't approved for use in humans.
Ugh.
And so, like, I just had a conversation with a client this morning where they were like, "Oh, well, my doctor prescribed BPC 157." I go, "That's really funny because you can't prescribe that." He goes, "Yeah, he prescribed it and we sent it to a compounding pharmacy and they made it for me." I'm like, "That is 100% illegal. You're not legally allowed to give that to a patient for the patient to take." And so a lot of these peptide manufacturers and these people that are doing these compounding pharmacies are kind of skirting the laws with the peptides, like BPC 157. Are you familiar with what that is? So
BPC
if
157.
BPC 157 is a peptide that is very, very popular in bodybuilding circles because we don't know if this is true. It has some preliminary data and a lot of anecdotal data that it helps repair tendons and ligaments. So like if you have arthritis or joint pain or tendonitis or something like that, people will take BPC 157. The funny thing about it is it's legal to sell for research purposes. It is not legal
Mm,
to sell for someone to take.
I see.
And so you can buy it online just fine, but you have to
Is
say
that what they
that
call? Is that what they call SARMs?
no, SARMs are different.
SARMs are
SARMs are
different.
are an androgen receptor modulator, and so they're essentially steroids have some side effects, and you have to inject most steroids. SARMs are an oral pill that is the idea behind it is that it would give you the benefits of steroids without the side effects. Unfortunately, that's not true, and
Got it.
there's
Yeah,
even
I
less
think
safety
in the
data.
black market, that's how they kind of get that out there too. It's like this is for research only, right?
Yeah, yeah, they can do that a lot. And so what ends up happening is the FDA just watches it for like a decade until like somebody gets hurt. And then when somebody gets hurt, then all of a sudden they swoop in because they don't have the money to really regulate all this stuff all the time. And so that's how people are getting some of these drugs. And so with BPC 157, you can technically order, like I could order it right now legally and that'd be fine. I'm not allowed to take it. And it's weird when a doctor prescribes it because it's like that's a paper trail for you to like really get caught if somebody
Got
really
it.
wanted to turn you in. But you know, these people are taking these things that are technically supposed to be put into petri dishes and
Yeah. Yeah,
and
that's
they're
scary. That's
yeah, and
really
they're
scary.
either injecting it in the case of BP 157 or BPC 157 or you know, taking it orally in the case of like SARMs and stuff like that. But it's funny because I don't think that many people realize that these compounding pharmacies, what they may be providing you with is illegal, and you're just taking it because people really want an answer. They really want a fix. And
Hmm.
Yeah.
GLP-1s are going to be bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's a whole other conversation that I
Oh yeah.
Now, did you see that this happened a few months ago and the decision got banned, but semaglutides are taken off the shortage list now. So, which means that compounding
can't be compounded.
as of April and or May, they have to stop. And I did see that Hims and Hers said that they're going to stop as well as of like in first quarter.
They
Uh,
have to legally, or they're going to get sued into the ground.
Right. So, but I know, of course, one of these compounding pharmacy unions or associations, of course, filed a lawsuit to block it. So we'll see what happens. But
They
that's going
legally
to
they
be crazy for a lot of people if all of a sudden their compounded GLP-1s aren't available. And I think people need to start thinking about that because it's the same thing as we've been talking about too. Is like you can't like most people don't want to take these forever, even though that's what we kind of know that they need to do.
kind of have to
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna
for
say
most
they
people.
kind of have to.
Oh,
Yeah,
if
you
you have
kind
no
of have
Yeah.
to.
plan, you better
Yeah.
start fucking making one.
So GLP-1s, it's a really interesting topic, and it's a topic that this is almost like the menopause transition, in that the people that really want that information, they don't want to hear what's really happening with this stuff. And there's nothing technically wrong with the GLP-1
Right.
mimetic. I mean, they're
Right.
great. They're great drugs.
They are.
The problem is they're being abused right now, and I've got a feeling
Oh
that within
yeah.
like 20 years we're going to see an epidemic like we did with the opioids. We're going to
Yes.
see an epidemic caused by GLP-1s. We don't realize that that's happening yet, and the reason that we don't realize is that is happening is because when you initially lose body fat, all of your blood markers are going to improve. The problem is the reason that there was a run on these things and the reason that we had a short supply is because it wasn't the diabetics and the people with eating disorders that were taking it. It was everybody with the vanity reasons were
Right.
gobbling it up, because we never had a problem with an issue of supplying these in the past until the vanity crowd got into play.
Yeah.
This is not appropriate for vanity reasons. It's not appropriate to lose 15 pounds. It's not.
Mhm.
No.
And you're essentially
And this is
taking,
this is what's happening.
yeah, I know. You're
What?
taking it from diabetics.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and so the big problem is
Yeah.
the people that are doing it for vanity reasons are using this in lieu of proper nutrition and proper training, which should be the base anyways.
Hmm.
If you do this without proper nutrition and proper training in play, the way that this works is it causes your appetite to suppress. It stops you from eating. Who would think that over extended periods of time, starving would be a healthy thing?
Mhm.
You know, starvation, not eating, can work in short periods of time because losing that excess body fat, to one of the things that you said earlier, Matt, is one of the most important things possible for overall health. We were talking about injury risk, but for anything,
Yep.
it's
Yep.
really super important. Excess body fat is really problematic. It produces inflammation causing adipokines that cause systemic inflammation, that cause a whole host of issues, which eventually leads to things like diabetes and all these other problems. You know, and so removing excess body fat is always a really great thing. But if you are just taking these, you're not getting a coach. So you're not learning coping mechanisms. You're not learning habits. You're not learning how
Hmm.
to lift and eat correctly. You're going to essentially starve yourself into unhealthiness.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so that tends to happen. And so if we take this out 10 or 20 years, sarcopenia rates are going to really go up. Osteoporosis rates are really going to go up. If you want to talk about
Hmm.
issues going through the menopause transition after the advent of GLP-1s for vanity reasons, it's going to be 100 times worse.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
Hmm.
already seeing it now. I'm sure you guys are too, as coaches. People that have were some of the earlier adapters of the GLP-1s, and they didn't understand the importance of high protein, still eating enough calories, and strength training. And now they're
Yeah.
like, "Oh man, I'm really fucked up. Like
Yeah,
I need help now. I
I'm
wish
seeing
I
it a
would have
lot.
known." Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
seeing it a
that's what we're
lot.
seeing, and when
And that's it's like,
we're
man, we've been
coaching
fucking
too.
saying this. Like, please just listen to us, you know?
Yeah, and unfortunately, people are looking at it as, "Oh, you just wanna push coaching." It's like, "No, we know that it's the healthiest thing," because you
Right.
need to learn those coping
Yeah,
mechanisms. You need to learn those habits and routines.
People said at first, we're just scared that GLP-1s are gonna take our jobs." Like, no, our jobs are even more important now.
yeah.
Yeah, it really is, and unfortunately, these people are going to find out too late because, again, this is all that whole thing of, "Let's get rid of an immediate discomfort." I mean, and this is any gender at this point. Let's get rid of any immediate discomfort. Okay, it's difficult to change my eating habits that I've had for 4 decades or 5 decades or whatever it is. Therefore, I'm just gonna get a drug so I don't have to worry about that. I just stop eating.
Right. Yeah.
That's not what's
Which
gonna
taking
help.
the drug to help with the food noise, right, and the appetite, great, but you still not on its own, not a great idea, right?
A- and this is where I have a problem. It's like, okay, you have someone that maybe has been chronic dieting, right? They're still slightly overweight and they're not obese, but they've never done anything that they can fucking stick to. They never created a lifestyle they can stick to. They've yo-yo dieted their whole entire life. So they don't really even understand what it's like to eat like a normal person.
Mhm.
They start taking the drugs because they think they need it. But they really just need to do the fucking boring basic shit. And that's where it's like it's very confusing to people because they see this as like the fucking disco ball, shining bright lights, everyone's
Yeah,
doing it, everyone's getting skinny. Why can't I do it? And they need maybe 20 to 30 pounds to lose.
yeah.
And it's
But
like that's,
you've seen the way this stuff's marketed. I mean, Hims and Hers, we talked about the Super Bowl commercial, the way they marketed. That was brilliant marketing, but it took all personal responsibility out of the factor.
It's
and
it's
then
so
yeah,
disingenuous.
Yeah.
yeah. Then you
But
have
again,
people,
this it's funny because this is the exact same mentality. This is a human mentality that we're talking
Mhm.
about, and this is
yeah,
why I
that's
don't want
true.
when we talk about the menopause transition and we say this is what's happening in the menopause transition, this is not to gang up on women or be indicative of women. This is just
Yeah.
this is your version of it during that period. But men are certainly doing it with GLP-1s too. It's that,
Mhm.
hey, you know, I just need to get through that discomfort in the beginning, or I just need to remove all of the discomfort and
I need a kickstart.
you don't realize that the challenge is often the way. The obstacle is the way. And so learning to surpass that obstacle is what's going to set you up for success in the future. Because if you ever want to come off of that GLP-1, you're going to have those in play. But even before doing that, when you go into a GLP-1, you should probably expect to be on it for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Because that's what the
That's
research
very important to understand.
shows us. I mean, the overwhelming evidence so far is that you need to keep the results. Essentially, you need to keep taking the drugs, and when you don't, uh, you relapse in a way.
Well, the recidivism rates are extremely high. And the recidivism rates are extremely high, probably because it's a large population of people that aren't learning those habits and routines to actually bring them
Right.
to success. So it's probably even worse. Well, if we
There
start
are
to look at this
studies,
over
right?
time, the recidivism rates are probably going to get worse and worse as this goes on, because even if people lose the weight through diet and exercise, at least they're learning something along that
Yeah.
way. And so recidivism rates are tempered to an extent. This will have none of that
Mhm.
unless that's also the main focus. This is an adjunct. This is not the focus. This is an adjunct to
Mhm.
that other stuff.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And the research is showing that too, like in conjunction with strength training and the high protein diet. I do believe there's some studies out there, right, in terms of the long term efficacy of GLP-1s. It's always with comparing, no behavior change with the behavior change, and the results speak for themselves.
Yeah, so it does not absolve you of your responsibility to eat whole foods and getting into the gym, and that's a
Mhm.
really big thing. And the other thing that's really funny about GLP-1s is that people will talk all the time about, oh, you see this extreme muscle loss in people that are on GLP-1s, and we do actually see that. The thing is, it's not due to the drug itself. The drug itself is
Right.
actually a little bit protective for skeletal muscle. GLP-1s actually protect the skeletal muscle itself. But again, you're starving yourself.
Right.
It cannot counterbalance starvation.
Yeah.
And so
Because
these
you,
people that
you
are
don't have the
going in,
protein, you don't have the nutrients, nothing.
yeah, you're not lifting weights to be able to prevent it. And so, throw these GLP-1s into the mix in a perimenopausal crowd that is more susceptible to sarcopenia, more susceptible to osteoporosis. What do you think is going to happen?
Mhm.
If they're not
Th-
already doing these
These
basics.
these women are going to destroy their health,
Oh
Mhm.
my
and they're
God. And
going to be very lean, and so they're not going to realize that they now have bones that are as hollow as a bird's.
yeah, and
Right, because being
wait,
lean and weak is dangerous for your health too.
Yeah. And speaking of which, now that I think about it, when you're asking me about menopause and what's going on, is that a lot of people in the menopause space are pushing low dose GLP-1
Hmm.
for menopause management, insulin resistance type stuff, because
Is
they're
that
throwing
even
that in there.
that's not even an approved usage. I don't
I'm pretty sure it's not, but that's what I'm seeing.
like.
And
I mean,
it's
that's not.
all,
That,
it's lean people. Like, this is my menopausal maintenance, like GLP-1 dose. And I'm just like, what the fuck? That's a
GLP-1s.
thing now?
They've got a very, very high probability of working very well in certain populations. The problem is it's just the wrong people are taking them
Yeah.
now. If you're diabetic, if you have an eating disorder, if you've got another pathology or condition that necessitates this, yeah, it can be a really great thing. It can be awesome for an eating disorder because it cuts a lot of that food noise out of play,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is a great thing because then you can learn those habits. And so hopefully
Especially
the
like
people,
binge eating and things like that.
Mhm. But the people that are
um,
getting this for eating disorders are being followed by a psychiatrist.
right.
And so they're teaching them those habits to be able to
Right.
to deal with this type of thing. I mean, and that's the thing that's really missing, that responsibility with taking the drug is just lacking right now. And when it's at the compounding pharmacy, it's just scary what's going to come from this over the years if we don't start to get this message out there.
Hmm.
Hmm.
I agree. And to your note about helping with eating disorders and things like that, have you seen the study that just came out like last week about GLP-1s and with its correlation with helping alcohol usage disorder?
I haven't, but
I could send it
I'd be
over
very
your.
open to understanding that
Yeah,
that would help.
essentially, it helps the same kind of ways that people are using food is what people are using alcohol for. So it helps with reducing the amount that they're drinking when they are drinking. So kind of like the same way with like when GLP-1s help with the food noise, where
Mhm.
when they still eat, but it just helps them with not overeating essentially. So it's pretty cool. I don't even know how many people. It was really small, 40 people or something, but
I don't have any issue with a doctor prescribing it in that manner if they think they can help. As long as
Yeah.
they're explaining to a person what all's going on, what we need to do, that type of stuff. But this is one of those things that I dread what we're going to be looking at in 10 to 20 years. And I
totally.
didn't even
Agreed.
think about until we started talking about this. I didn't even think about the havoc that this is going to wreak on the menopause transition.
Yeah.
Because that's going to make it even worse. It's going to amplify the problems. I don't have an opinion on super low dosing, and its effects because the question for me is going to be like, what are the side effects going to be? What I do want to emphasize to women that are going through it is that whether or not you have insulin resistance, if you need to lose body fat, it has no bearing on it can't prevent you from losing weight. Can't prevent you from losing body fat. Insulin resistance makes no difference in the presence of a calorie deficit. It
Right.
straight up, it can't.
Right.
And so this is another thing that people get really confused about because if you have insulin resistance is actually an evolutionary trait. It's a good thing initially. That's why it's there. So insulin will drive resources into either skeletal muscle or into adipose tissue. We love it when it helps build muscle. We don't love it
Right.
when it helps build fat tissue, right? So when your body becomes resistant to insulin, it becomes resistant to the effects of insulin driving these resources into these cells. It actually prevents fat gain initially. That's why it's there, and it keeps building and building and building until you get massive backups. The inflammation starts to build, all these other things, and then all these health problems from gaining more body fat. But I think that people really don't understand that the insulin resistance is a feature again of the human body. It's not a bug. It's just we overwhelm it
Right.
with too much. And if you have high cortisol and high insulin in the presence of a hypercaloric diet, that's a recipe for a problem.
And this was
Hmm.
what people don't understand right here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
Exactly
so
what
if
you're saying.
even if we look at the studies in women with PCOS, the diets that work on women that don't have PCOS, the exact same diets work on women with PCOS. There's no difference in what diets work. Just because there are higher rates of insulin resistance and PCOS doesn't mean that you change anything up. You do the exact same things, and there is research showing this. That doesn't mean that just like the menopause transition, the experience isn't different because the experience for PCOS is much different than a normal woman.
Yeah.
And
Like the
so,
margin of error for doing those things is just a little, not as great.
well, the issue is mainly women with PCOS have lower levels of satisfaction with body image. They have higher rates of depression. They have a lot of these ancillary psychological things that are going on that comes with PCOS. And this is again, this is not to be negative in any way. This is to
Hmm.
say, hey, look, when we look at this in research, the dropout rates for women with PCOS are insanely high compared to women that don't have it.
Mhm.
Now, if they would have gone on forward, they actually would have probably lost that weight. But because of all those things that you're dealing with on the side, the depression, the lesser feelings of self-worth, the feelings that, oh, I've got this disease that is preventing this from happening, which
Mhm.
we're now getting this in the menopause transition. The menopause influencers are suggesting it's this disease that is preventing
Right.
having these things. And when we present things like a disease, the psychological ramifications are extremely profound. And we see that in the PCOS population.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I could see that for sure. 100%.
Absolutely.
So this is a difficult thing to talk about, but hopefully it gives some clarity during these time periods because it is such a controversial topic. And when you're looking at this information, when you're looking at the studies, be very, very hypercritical of the studies that are coming out because what we're seeing a lot of is we're seeing a lot of people put out studies and then making a claim of saying, hey, look, this is what that study says. And the study doesn't say that.
Right.
So you've got to be very, very critical about that. And if you've got somebody that you think, okay, well, maybe if they're doom and gloom about this, oh, this is causing all these major problems. If they're using the terminology, it's doubling your fat gain. It's doubling the amount of muscle that you've lost. You should probably get a second opinion on the studies that they're sharing and certainly reach
A
out
lot
to
of times they
somebody.
won't even share the studies. They just say a study, a
Yeah.
study. If they're
Yeah,
not
which is
citing a study, that's a huge red flag to begin with.
which is also a big red flag. But just like the Swan study
Uh-huh.
with the one that, that shows that, I mean, that's one that they always tend to show because they can say that it doubles body fat and it does. It's just, it doesn't mean anything because it's
Yeah. Going back to that study, actually, I believe I don't want to speak for our friends, but I do believe they were kind of in agreement with the findings of the Swan study because
with my
yeah,
recommendation.
I believe so. Don't want to speak for them, but that's my understanding. And there was like 30. I looked it up while you were talking. It was 3,300 and like two people that were in that study.
Okay.
And then,
So
since we're talking about citing studies too, the study that I mentioned about the glutide
Alcohol?
alcohol and once weekly semaglutide in adults with alcohol use disorder by Christian S. Endershot and colleagues, and it was published February 12th of this year. So
I love that. I mean, I love that it's good. It's getting these applications, and it's certainly had some very good support in the eating disorder section. So
yeah,
I'm very open about. I mean, probably personal bias. I would be very open about it working in alcoholism as well.
yeah.
Mhm.
Who knows? Like they always say, these things need to be researched. So it's
Yeah.
still cool, promising. I know we're going at it here, but talking about studies and stuff, how can people start to decipher like what's right and real and what's bullshit? Because a lot of these influencers just know that you're not going to go read the research and look at the paper and things like that. That's
I
my
mean, this
understanding as well. A lot of people don't actually read the citations. The people
well,
citing them a lot of the times don't even
even
read
even
them.
if you read the citations, you may not get the right answer. And I mean, the
No.
Swan
Right.
study is a very good example of it because if you read it and it says it doubles the fat gain, well, that's what you're going to take away. And maybe
Yeah.
you don't realize, oh, maybe I should look at the raw data to see what the actual gain was, and then you realize, oh, it's super small.
Mhm.
But this is a difficult question because there's no easy answer. And there's no
Yeah.
easy answer because you're going to need to figure out if the person that you're talking to really understands how to read the research and if they've got your best interests at heart. And those two things are very difficult because it tends to be that the larger following accounts are larger following accounts because they tend to be more hyperbolic. They tend to make
Yeah.
grander claims. They tend to prey on emotions. That's why they become large. Because if you go out there and you say, hey, just eat right, exercise, get your sleep and stress relief. And that's not sexy. That doesn't get rid of your culpability. That doesn't make you feel good in the moment. That puts the onus on you, and that feels aggressive. And so this is not a good thing to feel. And so the guys or girls that make you feel bad, they might be the ones that you want to pay attention to because they're probably not afraid to tell you what's actually happening. And they're probably doing it because in their heart, they're probably better about it. It's like when Beth says, we can do hard things and is like, hey, look, we could baby you, but that's essentially, patronizing. And
Mhm.
that's not great. Menopausal women don't deserve that. Anybody, like no
No.
population deserves that. And saying, "Oh, you poor baby,"
You're right.
is
Yeah.
is is just it's so awful. And that's what's happening a lot of the time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so the best thing that you can do is you can say, "Hey, if you find two people with varying claims, different claims, like the Swan study is a great example of that. This influencer says It doubles your body fat gain. You say that it doesn't. Why do you say that it doesn't? Get them to explain why the other side is wrong. Because I think that a lot of the influencers can say why they believe that they're right. But if you have an understanding of why you're right and the other side is wrong, that's probably the best indicator that the person has an understanding of the topic as a whole. Because we can admit, yeah, the body fat gain does seem to double, but it's not much of anything. So like if we adjust for age, the age-related changes, and a pound, 1.75 pounds is something that you feel is dooming you, then maybe we should reevaluate expectations for body fat gain over a lifetime, because 1.75 pounds in 8 years is probably not, in a population that doesn't eat right or
Yeah.
exercise, that's probably not anything to really worry about.
Right.
Hmm.
You know, and we assume that the people that are listening to these types of podcasts, I assume that you're probably smarter. I assume that you're probably somebody that's interested in their health, that's exercising,
Hmm.
that is looking at what they eat. And if you go through the menopause transition and you say, hey, I watched everything that I ate and I gained 30 pounds. That doesn't invalidate what the research on thousands and thousands of women say. That means that there is likely something that you just were not aware of. And it's not that you are wrong or that you are bad. It's, maybe you weren't monitoring your step count. Maybe you didn't realize that you were walking 12,000 steps a day before, and now all of a sudden you're getting 4,000, and you're eating the same thing, but your energy expenditure is massively down, because we see that a lot through
Yeah.
that
Mhm.
transition.
We just talked about that last week.
Yeah, and maybe the whole issues with not being able to sleep is throwing off your dietary adherence, and you're just having bites and licks and tastes of foods over times. But you're like, but my main meals are the same than what I was eating before. But you're not thinking about that handful of trail mix or whatever it is. And then if you start really tracking it, that becomes a thing. Maybe you are having errors in your tracking for decades prior to the menopausal transition. And now with that loss of energy
Neat.
expenditure, yeah, of NEAT, all of a sudden those errors in tracking are catching up, and they're really putting you into that calorie surplus that you were never in
Hmm.
before. I mean, there's a lot of explanations for why this is happening. What doesn't appear to happen is that your metabolism is screwed.
Right.
There could be a slight drop off in metabolism, and I would say, hey, that makes a lot of sense. But even when you look at the Swan study, BMI not changing once you account for age really makes me think that there is no drastic change in metabolism. Otherwise, we would see it in thousands and thousands of women. You would see it it was the Ponzer study. I think that it was the 8,000 people. You would see it in the Ponzer study that looked at metabolism from 20 to 60 holding steady in
Yeah.
both men and women. Unless you're telling me that the menopausal transition doesn't start until after 60, that covers the large majority of women going through menopause. So if that was the case, 50% of the sample should show that there's something different going on based on gender.
Yeah.
But we don't see these things.
Yeah.
And so, when you're talking about how do I figure out who to trust, these are those types of explanations that you should start to look into, and then look at the power of the evidence that they're showing. Look at what's happening in the real world, because these people that really like to use this fear mentality, or the prey drive on you, they'll show a lot of mechanistic data. They'll say, hey, look, in this rodent model, or hey, look, in this petri dish, or hey, look, this is what happens with this part of the body. And you're like, okay, well, cool. But show me the outcome data. Does the outcome show what you're saying is happening?
Hmm.
And if you don't see it in the outcome, then you have to assume that there's either something wrong with their data, or they're not accounting for a compensatory mechanism that is in play. Like things like, oh, look at this cortisol. It's raised really high. Therefore, you need to stay away from it. You're like, hold on, hold
You
on.
can't just look at it in isolation,
You
right?
just said that the
Right.
cortisol is really high. Can you show me that this actually leads to body fat gain? Shut up.
Right.
Don't ask me those questions, and don't look 2 hours beyond what the point that I'm saying it's really high, because then you'll see that it's much lower than what it was if you did the other type of cardio. But, it's these type of like manipulations of
Un
data and the
Unfortunately,
mechanism.
when you ask them those questions, they don't like to get questions, and that's
No,
with a lot of these big influencers.
no, no,
They're not in
It's
their comment section answering questions. That's the problem.
yeah,
no. I mean,
that's
it's probably
true.
smart for them not to be in the comment section
Right. I
answering
mean, just
questions.
like any of Bobby fucking Parrish's videos, he doesn't answer any questions, of course, because he's a fucking liar.
So if people really want a good recommendation of someone to look for the menopause transition that is very straightforward and is really on top of things, I mean, Jen Gunter
I
is a
was going to
good
say Jen
Yeah.
Gunter for
Oh
sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
is,
Absolutely.
and she's semi a pariah with these other people because she's actually called them out multiple times. She
Hmm.
was one of the ones that reshared my
Yeah.
reels from this week on the thing saying this is right.
Nice.
So she has butted heads with these people a lot because they will put out studies and she'll be like, that's not what that says. And they've all ended up
Hmm.
blocking her. Now she is
Of course.
she's very blunt with her presentation of it. But for people that are looking to
That's why I like
understand
it.
them, yeah, well, for people that are looking to understand the menopause transition, she's very reliable. The information that
Hmm.
she puts out is very good. She is not trying to scare you. She is just presenting what it says. And so I don't want to get on here and say, hey, look, everybody that's in the menopause space is really doing, bad things. They're all trying to take advantage of you because there are some people that are doing really good work. I mean, Amanda Thebe is
Yeah.
another one that
Yeah.
tends to do very
She's
good
been on our
work.
podcast.
She's great.
Yeah.
All of her information is very, very good. And what's cool about them, both Amanda and Jen, and vice versa with me, when we have topics like studies that we see and we think that it's the other person's wheelhouse, we'll send them to each other. And we'll
Hmm.
say, hey, I'm thinking this when I look at the study. What do you think? And I think that the sign of a good doctor or the sign of a good influencer or the sign of a good coach is that you realize where your boundaries are, where your specialties or your limitations are, and you reach out for help. And then you can get people the proper information. And so, if
Yeah.
more and more studies come out about this menopausal transition and say, hey, in the future, I say, hey, there, originally I told you that there was probably not a significant drop off in resting metabolic rate. I think that there is a drop off in energy expenditure because people move a lot less.
Hmm.
But I think that there's not a massive drop off in resting metabolic rate, even if there's a slight one. If things change because we get more research in the future, and I say, hey, look, I was wrong. This changes. That doesn't necessarily change the message of fitness and nutrition protocols need to change. And it's the way that science works. If you see a study that is better and it counters something that you said before, you better change your mind on it. Otherwise, you're a disingenuous researcher.
Yeah.
Nailed it. Look for ways that
Yeah.
you're look for reasons why you might be wrong, right? Like you just said, you share articles with your colleagues, and that's the peer review process in a way, and point out flaws in my thinking, please. Like that's how you get better.
When
Yeah.
you get a good researcher, and I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about like the people that run the studies themselves. The best researchers are the one that have a theory, and the entire purpose of their study is to disprove that theory.
Hmm.
That's how you get the best research. If you completely try to disprove a theory, because if you disprove it and you're like, I cannot disprove this seems to be a 100% on point. That's a
Hmm.
wonderful example of something that works really well. If you have a theory and you go in trying to prove it, that's where we start to get all of these like accidental biases coming into play. Methodology errors tend to happen. We tend to have misinterpretations of data because of these types of things. And you see researchers do that all the time. And just because something is peer reviewed doesn't mean that it's factually correct or that the conclusion that they come to is correct.
Right.
The peer review does not check the conclusion for accuracy
Hmm.
or for practicality and accuracy. It can test for accuracy based off of what they're showing in the data, but not necessarily practical accuracy, depending on what it is. For instance, you can look at things like branched chain amino acids. You can look at a systemic review of branched chain amino acids. You can say without a doubt that they will improve recovery. You can do that. You can put it in a conclusion. You can say this improves recovery. However, if you're getting more than 1.1 grams per kilogram of body weight per day in protein, doesn't seem to do anything. If you compare it to an equated number of calories in, say, carbs, just straight sugar, doesn't seem to do anything. It's the calorie content of BCAAs that are doing it, not the BCAAs themselves. And so this is one of those ways that like people will say, oh, I can prove to you that my supplement works. This BCAA will improve recovery. Here's a systemic review. It shows it. It does, but it's not going to matter for you because you're actually eating protein.
Or, let's try to get it there, get you there with protein first, right? Because that's obviously we want people to get there without supplementation because that's going to be more beneficial and help them long run because these are real skills that they're learning.
Well, outside of like in the middle of like endurance type training, those levels of protein that are required to negate the benefits of the amino acid supplements, it's lower than what we would recommend for hypertrophy levels anyways.
Right.
So so it's a very modest amount of protein that tends to negate some of these benefits. But this is just an example of the fact that, studies are very, very difficult to read. So find people
Yeah.
in the niche that you're investigating and ask multiple people. And if
Hmm.
if people disagree, ask them to explain the other person's stance. And I'm not saying like start a group text with the two people and say, go at it. But I'm saying, like, take notes on what's going on there and then present the argument back and forth. And then you as an adult can start to come to some conclusions on your own. I think
Yeah.
that it can make some sense. And, certainly be cautious if the person has a book to sell on the topic or specific supplements that will
Like
handle
me,
it,
I
or a
would say
specific
is
training protocol
follow
that'll
the
handle it.
link tree and see where their links take you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm saying this, and I actually have a link to Legion supplements where you can use my code and you can get 20% off and all that different type of stuff. But I say that, but it's really funny because when Legion was looking to pick me up, I had a conversation with them and I was like, I am not going to recommend everything in your line. And they're like, that's cool.
Yeah.
I'm like, there are some things that I will recommend. And
Right.
there are some things that I won't recommend. And they were like, okay, cool. Recommend the things that you want to recommend and then don't do the rest. And
That's
so
that's a respectable company. That's
yeah,
somebody you want to do business with. Yeah.
yeah, and so I was like, okay, cool, I'll do that. And so I recommend, the creatine and the fish oils and magnesium supplement if you need some magnesium replacement, and certainly
Yeah.
protein powder if you want some protein and stuff like that. I'm not going to recommend the greens powder.
Yeah,
Right.
right. Same way with us. Like we don't recommend hardly anything. The only thing we recommend is we're sponsored. Our podcast is sponsored by Cure Nutrition. We love
Yeah.
their gummies, and we like so we recommend them. We talk about them a lot, but because we love them and we use them. It's not because somebody's paying us to do it. So
Yeah. I feel like it's just a pain in the ass to have a sponsor in the first place, to be honest.
Yeah.
I don't like selling.
we're not influencers. We're not here to be like.
I fucking hate selling shit. I hate like, oh, but we have this fucking sale, or it's like, nah, I don't fucking care. I don't
Yeah.
want it. Here's another link. I'm so sick of seeing links and fucking codes and promos. It's like, stop.
Yeah,
It's too much. I never see you push Legion ever.
I rarely push it. Yeah, I rarely. Some people probably don't even know that I'm sponsored by them. I rarely push it, but so
I didn't. I didn't.
yeah, the times that it comes up is when someone's like, hey, I heard that because there are supplements that I recommend. I do recommend the ones that I mentioned. I think that,
Yeah.
I mean, the research shows that we're pretty deficient in magnesium. And fish oils have a lot of evidence that suggests that they probably work if you have the proper EPA and DHA amounts. Protein powder, I think that's kind of self-explanatory because it's basically powdered food, So there's all these supplements. Creatine, I mean, can you really argue creatine anymore? Can people
Right.
say, oh, I don't believe in it? I mean, pretty
Yeah.
rare. So there's all these ones that I recommend. And so when people will say, okay, well, what stack do you recommend? There's probably 4 or 5 that I say can be very, very beneficial depending on what people say. And then maybe a dozen others, depending on the situation. Now, I'm not going to recommend all
Yeah.
dozen, but there's like a dozen others that when a person tells me I have this issue or I've got this, I'll say, okay, well, consider this, And so I'll give those recommendations. And if people are like, well, where can I get it? I'll be like, go here, and
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's when it comes up. Otherwise, it doesn't really come up.
Yeah, I think that's a big
Exactly.
thing for people to look for is how much are they selling? Like if they're just on there constantly, use my code. Here's this supplement. Here's this supplement. Like
Yeah.
yawn straight to prison, right, Beth?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, fucking jail. You're done.
Now that I've said this, you'll probably see me put it up every once in a while, but
We'll be
yeah.
we mentioned it,
I'm gonna be on the lookout.
and we're gonna
Uh-huh.
keep a count. Alan, don't you fucking let us
We'll,
down.
we'll come back in a month. There were 19 times.
You would
you
never
said
mention greens, and I
Yeah.
see it.
you 19 times. I will never recommend a greens product. I mean, I have such a campaign against like AG1 right now that it's unreal. Charging like as much money as they charge for essentially a supplement that's probably not going to do much of anything is just
Yeah.
Yeah, greens are just insanely marked up.
eat
price-wise.
some damn vegetables. You're
There you
not
go.
getting the quality vegetables with the quality nutrients in that powdered form that you think you are. You're getting mostly like wheatgrass. So like,
Mhm.
please
Yeah.
eat some fruits, eat some vegetables. They
Mhm.
taste a lot
Please.
better. If you don't like vegetables, it's because you don't know how to prepare them.
Yeah. Exactly. Season that shit.
Yeah.
Using that shit.
My heater's about to die.
All
Well,
right.
we've been at it for a while. Like
I'm
this
like,
is
oh
our
my god, it's
longest.
2:40.
I feel like if we just kept rolling, we would probably have a 3-hour conversation before we knew it.
I know. I don't have my charger in the house because it's in my office that doesn't currently
Yeah, you're
have
between
internet.
offices, right? Meow.
I am in between offices, so.
Well, thank you
Um,
guys so much for
Oh my
for
god,
allowing me to
thank
come on here
you.
and rant a little bit. I'm sure that this is a nuanced conversation. I'm sure that there's going to be some fun takeaways. I'm sure there's going to be some kickbacks to some of the points, but we're kind of happy to talk about these types of things as much
Yeah.
as people want. And
Mhm.
and yeah, if you've got a differing viewpoint, I'm more than happy to look at research that you have that is a differing viewpoint. But don't be surprised if I point out some holes if I find them.
Yeah,
And if it's
right?
something that's brand new, that's good too. Because if it's something that is different, maybe I can change my mind.
Well, if people wanted to share some research with you or try to change your mind, how can they reach you?
You can check me out on owiathletics.com. You can find my website. At the bottom of the website are all my links to social media, or look me up on Instagram at @drallenbacon. Just make sure you spell the first name right, Allan.
Yes.
Perfect.
Not
Well,
not ALAN. We got the
Right.
Allen and Allen,
But-
ALL and AL.
Yeah, we have a group text, and I changed his name to Alan spelled wrong.
did you?
Yeah,
Nice.
yeah.
I love it.
Looking forward to
Uh,
having a conversation. The Allen and Allens in the future too.
Yeah,
That'll be great. Thank you, guys. I appreciate
absolutely.
it.
Thank
Amazing, man.
you. Appreciate your time coming on
Yeah.
over almost an hour and 45 minutes. I think this is the longest podcast
Great.
episode we've ever had,
I agree, and it's been phenomenal.
actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great
Great conversation.
conversations. I'm sure people will take a lot from this episode, to be honest.
All
Yeah.
right.
So reach out to Alan, DM him on Instagram. He's really good at answering DMs and, ask him questions.
Thank you, guys.
Hope you enjoyed this episode, so why not share with a friend who needs to hear it? Send us a DM on Instagram or email us at cutthecrappod@gmail.com and join our Patreon at patreon.com/cutthecrappodcast. As always, we appreciate you and thanks for being here.